Hey, amazing viewers! Before we go into this riveting narrative, drop your location in the comments below. We love connecting with you all around the world. Also, if this is your first time here, press the subscribe button and join our incredible journey. Let's hit 10,000 subscribers this month together. Your support means everything. The vanishing silence. I never used to believe in those moments when life changes in an instant. You know, the ones where everything is fine, then suddenly, it's not. The kind of shifts people talk about in books and movies, where time slows down, and the world tilts just enough to make you dizzy. But the moment my daughter disappeared, I understood. That morning started just like any other. I woke up at 5:30 a.m., slipped into my running gear, and stepped outside for my usual jog. The crisp spring air wrapped around me as I ran through the quiet, misty streets of Greenwich. The golden morning sunlight filtered through the budding maple trees, their tiny green leaves trembling in the cool breeze. Running had been my escape for years, a ritual that kept me centered. I had rebuilt my life from the ground up, moving into this wealthy neighborhood, building a thriving career as a luxury real estate agent, and most importantly, creating a loving home for my daughter, April. April was everything to me. At 16, she was bright, responsible, and independent, the kind of daughter any mother would dream of. She had inherited her father's determination and my resilience. After losing my first husband in a tragic accident, I had raised her alone for 6 years before meeting Michael, my second husband. Michael was the picture-perfect man. A senior investment banker earning $500,000 a year, a dedicated churchgoer, and an avid philanthropist. Just last month, he had raised over $1 million for a children's hospital, his generosity making headlines in the local news. He was admired, respected, and he loved April, or so I had believed. By the time I returned home, the scent of freshly brewed coffee drifted through the kitchen. "Morning, Mom." April beamed at me as she flipped pancakes in her cheerleading uniform. The navy and gold colors of her school team suited her well. "Morning, sweetheart. Morning practice today?" I asked, grabbing a water bottle and taking a long sip. "Yup. We're working on a new routine for the championship," she said, her ponytail bouncing as she moved. "Don't work too hard today, okay?" "I could say the same to you," I teased, ruffling her hair as I headed upstairs to shower. Looking back now, I should have paid more attention. At the time, I ignored the small signs, how she had been covering her arms more often, even on warm days, how she had started to withdraw slightly, skipping cheer practice here and there, leaving dinner early to say she had homework. The way her laughter had quieted. I was too busy, too caught up in work. My career was thriving, and my reputation as a luxury real estate agent was soaring. There was always another high-profile client to impress, another property to sell. That morning, I left the house believing everything was normal. That was the last time I saw my daughter before she vanished. It started with a phone call. April was supposed to be home by 4:00 p.m. When I glanced at the clock at 4:30 and realized she wasn't back, I assumed she was with friends. But by 5:00, unease crept in. I sent her a quick text. "Me? Hey, sweetheart. Where are you?" No reply. By 6:00, I was calling her. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail. A tightness formed in my chest. By 7:00, my fingers were trembling as I dialed again and again. No response. I called her best friend, Emily. She left school like normal, Emily said, her voice uncertain. I thought she was going home. A sickening dread crawled up my spine. Michael walked into the room just as I was grabbing my car keys. He glanced at me, then at my phone. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice calm. "April isn't home. She isn't answering her phone," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "She's probably with a friend. Teenagers do this all the time," he said dismissively. I shook my head. "She always texts. Always. Something's wrong." Michael sighed. Caroline, she'll be back soon. Let's not overreact. Overreact. A strange coldness settled in my stomach. Ignoring him, I called the police. The officers arrived within the hour, taking down details as I paced the living room. They pulled up surveillance footage from the school. The last confirmed sighting of April was outside the school gates at 3:45 p.m. Then, nothing. She had vanished. A detective named Lieutenant Parker frowned as he studied the footage. There's a gap between the school cameras and the convenience store cameras. She could have gotten into a car here. I gripped the edge of the couch. What do we do now? We'll start by tracking her phone. We'll also canvass the area and interview her classmates, Parker assured me. Most missing teens come home within 24 hours. But I knew this wasn't normal. Michael sat beside me, his expression unreadable. Too calm, too unaffected. His hand rested on my shoulder, but it didn't comfort me. It only made my skin crawl. That night, I barely slept. I kept my phone beside me, checking it every few minutes, hoping, praying, for a message, a missed call, anything. Nothing came. The second day passed in a blur of police interviews, unanswered questions, and rising dread. The police tracked her phone, but it had been turned off since the moment she disappeared. Social media posts about her missing status spread like wildfire, but no leads emerged. And Michael? He went to work like nothing had happened. I stared at him in disbelief as he adjusted his tie that morning. You're going to work. What else can I do? Sitting here won't bring her back, he said smoothly. My blood ran cold. By the time the third night arrived, I was barely functioning. My body ached with exhaustion. My mind was in a constant state of panic. Then, at exactly 2:12 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID was unknown. I grabbed it, my heart slamming against my ribs. Hello. Silence. Then, a shaky breath. And then, Mom. I gasped. April. Oh my God. Where are you? I heard her breathing, ragged and uneven, like she was struggling to speak. I can't come home, she sobbed. My blood turned to ice. What? Why? What's happening? There was silence on the other end. I could hear faint noises, cars passing, voices in the background. Then, a whisper. Michael. The line went dead. I froze, my phone slipping from my hands. Beside me, in the darkness, Michael shifted slightly in bed. His breathing remained steady, but something about it felt forced. For the first time, I realized something terrifying. The man lying beside me wasn't just indifferent. He was dangerous, and my daughter knew it. The hidden truth. For a long moment, I just sat there in the dark, phone clutched in my trembling hand, heart hammering against my ribs. The room was unbearably silent, except for Michael's steady breathing beside me. I turned slowly, barely able to breathe. He was lying still, his face relaxed, as if he was sound asleep. But I knew better. His breathing wasn't natural. It was measured, controlled. My daughter was missing. She had just called me, crying, whispering his name like a warning. And now, lying next to me, was the man she feared. The realization hit like a slap. Michael was hiding something. My body stiffened. My skin crawled at the thought of his arm casually draped across the bed just inches away from me. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to get up, to move, but I forced myself to stay still, keep my breathing even. If Michael was pretending to sleep, I needed him to believe I was too. Slowly, carefully, I slid out of bed, making sure the mattress barely moved. I grabbed my phone and tiptoed out of the room, my pulse racing as I shut the door behind me. The hallway was dimly lit by the moonlight filtering through the windows. I made my way downstairs, barely able to feel my own footsteps. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what had just happened. April was alive, but she was scared, and she didn't want to come home. I reached the kitchen and immediately dialed her number again. Voicemail. I tried 3 more times, whispering her name each time. Nothing. I clenched my fists, panic and helplessness building inside me. Where was she? Who had her? Or worse, who was she hiding from? I couldn't shake the feeling that Michael knew more than he was letting on. His unnerving calmness, his refusal to take time off from work, his dismissive attitude toward her disappearance, it was all too off. I needed answers. And I knew exactly where to start. I crept back upstairs, barely breathing as I stepped into the bedroom. Michael hadn't moved. I walked to his side of the bed, heart pounding, and carefully reached for his phone on the nightstand. Locked. Of course. I needed his password. My eyes darted to him. I had seen him unlock his phone 1,000 times. The way his fingers moved in the same familiar pattern. Muscle memory took over as I tapped in the numbers. Access granted. I swallowed hard and quickly navigated to his call logs. My breath caught in my throat. There were multiple calls from a number saved as unknown, the same type of number that had just called me. I opened his text messages, my fingers trembling. Most were work-related, conversations with clients and colleagues. But then I found one, a deleted message. I restored it, and what I saw made my stomach drop. It's done. She's out of the house. My vision blurred. Michael had orchestrated this. I wanted to scream, to wake him up and demand the truth. But I knew I had to play this smart. I took a screenshot, sent it to my own phone, and deleted any trace that I had seen it. Then, as quietly as I had come, I put his phone back and slipped out of the room. I sat in the living room, hands gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles were white. My husband, the man I trusted, the man I let into my life, had something to do with April's disappearance. But why? I needed help. I called Detective Parker, my voice shaking. She called me. Parker's tone immediately sharpened. When? 15 minutes ago. She was crying. She said she couldn't come home. And then, she said Michael's name. Silence. Then, Caroline, listen to me carefully. Do you feel safe in your house? I turned my head toward the staircase, heart pounding. Michael was still upstairs, oblivious to the fact that I was onto him. No, I whispered. Get out. Right now. Don't take anything. Just leave. My hands tightened around the phone. If I leave, he'll know something's wrong. Then act like everything is normal. But you need to come in. We need to talk. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and made my decision. By morning, I was dressed and ready for work like nothing had happened. I sat at the kitchen table, stirring my coffee, pretending my world hadn't just been turned upside down. Michael walked in, his tie already in place, looking polished and composed as ever. You barely slept, he noted casually, pouring himself a cup of coffee. I forced a smile, worried about April. He nodded, sipping his drink. I told you, Caroline. She'll come back. I watched him carefully, searching for any crack in his expression. Nothing. He was good at this. Too good. Maybe you're right, I said, feigning exhaustion. I just need to keep busy. He kissed the top of my head. That's the spirit. I fought the urge to recoil. The moment I left the house, I drove straight to the police station. Detective Parker was waiting for me in a private room, his expression grim. Tell me everything. I recounted April's call, Michael's odd behavior, and the message I had found. When I showed him the screenshot, his jaw tightened. This is enough to open an official investigation into your husband. The words felt surreal. Michael, the Michael I married, was now the subject of a criminal investigation. Do you think he hurt her? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Parker hesitated. We don't know yet, but we do know that whatever happened to April, he's involved. A lump formed in my throat. How do we find her? Parker leaned forward. We need to dig deeper. There may be records, hidden transactions, surveillance footage we haven't seen. And you might be our best way in. I stiffened. You want me to stay with him. Caroline, I know this is dangerous, but right now he has no idea you're onto him. That gives us the advantage. If you keep playing the part, we can use that to gather more evidence. The thought made my skin crawl. Pretending to love the man who might have taken my daughter. Acting normal while he lied to my face. But I would do anything to bring April home, even if it meant staying in the same house as the devil. That night, I returned home. Michael was in the living room, casually reading the newspaper. Long day. Yeah, I said, forcing a smile. No new updates from the police. He sighed, shaking his head. I told you, she'll come back when she's ready. I sat across from him, studying his face, and for the first time, I saw it. Not the charm, not the charisma. The mask was slipping. And beneath it, there was something cold, calculating. I swallowed hard and met his gaze. I hope you're right, Michael, because if he wasn't, I was going to make him regret ever touching my daughter. Unmasking the monster. I had spent years building a life I thought was safe. A life where I could finally breathe again after losing my first husband. A life where I could provide my daughter with security, stability, and love. But now, every single piece of that life was shattering before my eyes, and Michael was at the center of it. April was still missing. She had called me, sobbing, terrified. She had whispered Michael's name before the line went dead. And now, I was trapped in the same house as him, pretending I didn't know the truth. But I knew. And I would do whatever it took to find her. That night, as Michael slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Detective Parker had told me to stay close to Michael, to act normal while they gathered evidence. But how could I stay in the same house as the man who might have hurt my daughter? I turned my head slightly, watching his chest rise and fall in steady rhythmic breaths. How many times had I trusted him? How many times had I let him near my daughter, believing he was the perfect father figure? My stomach twisted. I had been blind. Slowly, carefully, I slid out of bed. My heart pounded as I crept across the room and slipped out the door, making my way to Michael's home office. It was locked. Of course it was. Michael was always careful about his personal things, keeping his office private. He had claimed it was because of sensitive investment information, but now I knew better. I needed to get in. My fingers trembled as I pulled the bobby pin from my hair and knelt before the door. My hands weren't as steady as they once were, but desperation had a way of sharpening instincts. After a few tense moments, click, the door swung open. I slipped inside, heart racing, and shut the door quietly behind me. Michael's office was immaculate, everything in perfect order. But I wasn't fooled. The darkest secrets were always hidden where no one would think to look. I sat at his desk, opened his laptop, and tried the same password I had used for his phone. Access granted. My pulse quickened. I navigated through files, scanning them rapidly. Most of them were standard work documents, client reports, investment statements. Then I found a folder labeled Private. I clicked it open. At first, it seemed normal. Receipts, bank statements. But as I scrolled further, my stomach dropped. There were photos of April. Some of them were normal. Pictures from family outings, school events. But others, my breath caught. April sitting in her room, unaware. April walking to school, looking over her shoulder. April sleeping. These weren't normal pictures. They were surveillance. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Michael had been watching her, tracking her, and then I found the worst file of all. An email, sent 3 days ago. To unknown address. Subject, it's done. Message, she's out of the house. The less Caroline knows, the better. We'll handle the rest as planned. I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. He had planned this. Michael had orchestrated my daughter's disappearance. I felt like I was going to be sick. My vision blurred as I tried to process what I was seeing. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and took photos of everything. every file, every picture, every email. I had proof, and I wasn't going to waste another second. I backed out of the office carefully, locking the door behind me. My entire body was trembling, but I forced myself to walk back to the bedroom like nothing had happened. Michael was still asleep, or at least he appeared to be. I slid into bed, lying stiffly beside him, my mind racing with one thought. I had to get out of this house. I had to find April before it was too late. The next morning, I moved with purpose. I packed a small bag, pretending I had a work meeting. Michael was in the kitchen, sipping coffee. He glanced up at me. "You look tired." "I didn't sleep much," I admitted. "I'm heading to a client meeting. I'll be gone most of the day." He nodded, unconcerned. "Let me know if the police call with any updates." The ease in his voice made my skin crawl. I forced a smile, grabbed my keys, and walked out of the house. The moment I was in my car, I drove straight to the police station. Detective Parker was already waiting for me. The moment I stepped into his office, I locked the door behind me. "I found something." He frowned. "What?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the pictures. The surveillance photos of April. The email. His jaw clenched as he scrolled through them. Jesus Christ. I wrapped my arms around myself. He's been watching her, tracking her every move. And that email. Detective. He planned this. Parker exhaled sharply, his fingers tightening around the phone. This is enough to bring him in. But we still don't know where she is. Tears burned at the back of my eyes. She's still out there. And she's scared. Parker nodded. We need to move fast. If Michael suspects anything, he might try to disappear. And we can't risk that. I wiped my eyes and straightened. So what do we do? He met my gaze. We set a trap. That night, I returned home, pretending nothing had changed. Michael was waiting for me. How was work? I smiled, forcing my voice to stay light. Exhausting, but productive. I sat at the dinner table, pushing food around my plate, my mind spinning. Parker and his team were already in motion. They were tracking Michael's accounts, monitoring his phone. We just needed one slip-up. Michael poured himself a glass of wine, watching me. You seem distant. I forced a small laugh. Just tired. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. And then his phone buzzed. He picked it up, frowning slightly as he read the message. I pretended not to notice, but I saw it. The way his fingers tensed. The way his jaw clenched just slightly. Something had happened. And I knew, tonight, he was going to make a move. I excused myself early, heading upstairs, pretending to be exhausted. But instead of sleeping, I waited. Waited for him to slip up. Waited for him to lead me to April. Because the hunt wasn't over, and I was done being afraid. The reckoning. I lay in bed, my heart pounding against my ribs, counting the seconds as they passed in the dark. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of the floorboards settling, but I knew better. Silence could be deceptive. Michael was planning something. The text message he had received during dinner had changed his entire demeanor. His usual polished, calculated calm had faltered for just a second. But that was enough. I had seen it. The way his fingers had gripped his wine glass a little too tightly. The flicker of tension in his jaw. He was going to make a move. And I was ready. I turned my head toward him, careful to keep my breathing slow and steady. He was still lying beside me, his back turned, his body completely still. But something about the stiffness in his shoulders told me he was awake. Waiting. After what felt like an eternity, he moved. Slowly, cautiously, he shifted the blanket aside and got out of bed. I kept my eyes closed, barely daring to breathe. The soft rustling of fabric told me he was getting dressed. Then, after a moment, the faintest creak of the bedroom door opening. He was leaving. I waited until I heard his footsteps disappear down the hallway. Then, as soon as I was sure he was gone, I slid out of bed. My pulse roared in my ears as I tiptoed across the room, carefully cracking the door open just enough to see. Michael was heading downstairs, foam pressed to his ear. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I saw the tension in his body. He was in a hurry. I had two options. I could stay put and let the police handle this, or I could follow him. And after everything I had discovered, after every second of agony I had endured not knowing where my daughter was, there was no way in hell I was staying behind. I grabbed my phone and moved quickly, silently. I followed him outside, keeping to the shadows as he climbed into his car. He was alone. I hurried to my own car, parked a few houses down. My hands trembled as I started the engine, keeping the headlights off as I followed him from a distance. He drove fast, weaving through the empty Greenwich streets. The town was quiet at this hour, most people fast asleep in their expensive homes, blissfully unaware that a monster lived among them. Where was he going? I tightened my grip on the wheel as we left the residential area and veered toward the outskirts of town. My stomach churned with nerves. Then, after about 20 minutes, he slowed down. We were approaching an old industrial area, mostly abandoned warehouses and factories, long since shut down. Why here? I pulled over a safe distance away, watching as Michael parked in front of a crumbling building. He got out, his head swiveling as if checking to make sure he wasn't followed. Then he disappeared inside. I had to move fast. I pulled out my phone, quickly texting Parker. Me. I followed him. He's at an abandoned warehouse on 9th and Harbor. I think April is here. The response was immediate. Parker, do not go in alone. We're on our way. I knew I should wait. I knew it was reckless to go in by myself. But what if April was in danger? What if I was wasting precious seconds that could mean the difference between life and death? Screw it. I grabbed the small pocket knife from my glove compartment, the only weapon I had, and slipped out of the car. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of rusted metal. I kept to the shadows, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure Michael would hear it. The warehouse was eerily silent, except for the occasional drip of water leaking from somewhere unseen. Then, voices. I pressed myself against a wall, straining to listen. Wasn't supposed to happen this way. Michael's voice. Low. Angry. Another voice responded, but I couldn't make out the words. Then, a sound that nearly made me collapse with relief. A muffled sob. April. I clenched my fists. I had to get to her. I moved slowly, carefully stepping over broken glass and debris. My eyes adjusted to the dim lighting, scanning the warehouse for any sign of movement. Then, up ahead, I saw them. Michael stood near the center of the warehouse, speaking to another man. He was taller than Michael, broad-shouldered, wearing dark clothes. His face was partially hidden in the shadows, but something about him made my stomach twist. April was there too. She was sitting on the ground, her hands tied in front of her, her face streaked with tears. Rage like I had never felt before surged through me. Michael had done this. The man standing beside him had helped. And now I was going to end it. I took a deep breath, tightening my grip on the pocket knife. Then I stepped forward. Let her go. The words echoed through the warehouse, sharp and unwavering. Michael spun around, eyes widening in shock. Caroline. The other man reacted instantly, reaching for something at his waist, a gun. But before he could pull it, a voice boomed from behind me. Drop it. Hands in the air. Now. Red and blue lights flashed through the warehouse windows. Sirens wailed in the distance. Michael paled. The man hesitated, his grip tightening on the weapon. But the next second, a gunshot rang out, not from him, but from the police outside. A warning shot. The man cursed and raised his hands. Michael's face twisted with rage as two officers stormed in, weapons drawn. This is a mistake. You don't know what you're doing. Parker stepped forward, eyes dark and furious. No, Michael, you don't know what you've done. Two officers seized him, yanking his arms behind his back. He struggled, but it was useless. I didn't care about him anymore. I ran. Straight to April. She sobbed as I dropped to my knees, pulling her into my arms. "Mom." "I'm here, baby," I whispered, my own tears falling freely. "I've got you." She clung to me, trembling. Parker knelt beside us, his voice softer now. "April, you're safe. It's over." But as I held my daughter in that cold, dark warehouse, I knew the truth. This wasn't over. Not really. Michael was going to jail, yes, but the scars he had left behind, the damage he had done, would take far longer to heal. And as I looked into April's tear-streaked face, I made a vow. I would never let anyone hurt her again. The aftermath. For 3 days, I had lived in a nightmare. For 3 days, my world had been ripped apart, my heart shattered, my faith in the life I had built completely destroyed. And now, standing outside that cold, abandoned warehouse, holding my daughter so tightly that I could feel her heartbeat against mine, I realized something. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The following days passed in a blur of interviews, hospital visits, and sleepless nights. April was safe. That was the only thing that mattered. She had been taken, held captive by a man Michael had hired, a man with a long criminal record who had done dirty work for wealthy men who wanted their secrets buried. But Michael hadn't intended to hurt her. Not physically, at least. No, his plan had been far more insidious. He had wanted to scare her, break her, control her. April had figured out his secret weeks before I did. She had found evidence of his surveillance, realized he had been tracking her every move. She had tried to hide it, tried to act normal, but deep down, she had known something was wrong. And when she finally confronted him, when she told him she was going to tell me, he had made her disappear. A temporary solution, he had called it, a way to make her see reason. The man he hired had been told to keep her locked away for a few days, to scare her into silence. But Michael had miscalculated. He had underestimated April's strength, and he had underestimated me. The trial was a media spectacle. A successful philanthropic businessman, one of Greenwich's most respected figures, exposed as a controlling, manipulative abuser who had tried to silence his own stepdaughter. People called it shocking. I didn't. I had lived with the monster. I had loved him. And I had seen his true nature long before the world ever did. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison for conspiracy to commit abduction, unlawful surveillance, and child endangerment. His accomplice received 30. I never saw him again after the sentencing, and I never wanted to. But even after the trial, after the guilty verdict, after the headlines faded, and people moved on to the next big scandal, April and I were still left picking up the pieces, because the thing no one tells you about surviving trauma is that it doesn't end just because the danger is over. The nightmares don't disappear overnight. The fear doesn't magically go away. Some days, April would wake up in a panic, her hands shaking, her breathing erratic. Other days, she barely spoke at all, her once bright personality dimmed by everything she had been through. And as much as I wanted to fix it, as much as I wanted to erase what had happened to her, I couldn't. So instead, I did the only thing I could do. I stayed. I listened. I held her when she cried, let her scream when she was angry. And slowly, she started to heal. We both did. One night, about 6 months after everything had happened, I found April sitting on the back porch, staring up at the night sky. I sat down beside her. She didn't look at me right away. "Do you ever think about him?" The question caught me off guard. I had spent months trying not to think about him. I exhaled. "Sometimes." She nodded, pulling her knees to her chest. "I don't think I ever really knew who he was." I swallowed. "Neither did I." She turned to me then, her brown eyes searching mine. "Do you think we'll ever stop being afraid?" I hesitated, because I didn't know the answer. Instead, I reached over and took her hand. I think we'll get stronger. And one day, the fear won't control us anymore." She nodded slowly, as if considering my words. Then, for the first time in months, she smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It wasn't full of the confidence she used to have. But it was real. And in that moment, I knew we were going to be okay. Not today, not tomorrow, but one day. And that was enough. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.